The first cases in North America were reported in the United States in January of 2020. By March, the world had practically stopped. People weren't working, students were on break, and the world was uncertain of what was next. COVID took over the news, Fauci became our leader, and soon became our best friend, and the world we once knew was unrecognizable. A year later, we are very much still feeling the effects of the drastic changes the pandemic has caused. College students in particular are still dealing with the repercussions of the pandemic. I spoke with 2 undergraduates, a medical student, and a psychologist about the changes they face in their personal lives due to the pandemic.
We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
Hi, I'm Megan Condon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Rockland County, New York, which is just a little suburban city right outside New York City. I'm a public policy major and I am living on campus this semester.
Hi, my name is Grishma Anand. I use she, her pronouns. I am a junior neurobiology and physiology major and Spanish minor. And I'm the president of MaryPIRG as well as the coordinator of the public health campaign.
My name is Hayden Guidry. I'm a first year medical student at Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center in New Orleans. My pronouns are he, him, his. And yeah, I grew up in Southwest Louisiana and I went to undergrad at LSU Baton Rouge and I graduated in May 2020 and I just started medical school in the fall of 2021.
My name is Colleen Case, and I am a fifth-year graduate student in the Counseling Psychology doctoral program at the University of Maryland, College Park. My research interests focus on the physical and mental health of LGBTQ individuals. And clinically, I've done work as a therapist at the University of Maryland Counseling Center, the University of Maryland Health Center, and at several locations in the community.
No one was prepared to make the shift from in-person instruction to online. Universities struggled to convert their curriculums, and student engagement declined exponentially. We discussed the lack of connection between students to their peers and professors and what universities should do to make the experience better for their students.
So when the pandemic happened, I was contemplating even coming because especially out-of-state tuitions isn't the cheapest. So when I weighed the pros and cons, I felt as if I could get some sort of college experience by coming. So that's why I decided to come. I've been on the campus all year. So I've been here since August. It's definitely been different from varying from first semester to second semester in regards to COVID. But one thing that I would say is like the biggest impact is I feel like, especially freshmen, because I live on North Campus, everyone understands that we're in the same boat and like we're in the same place. And I don't know any different than the COVID life on campus. So I'm loving it for what it is. But every freshman's so welcoming, loving, like wanting to make friends, like doors are always open. I mean, not to go into rooms because of COVID and everything, but just to pop your head in and say hi and like meet a friend. People are always willing to go to the quad and be outside and be social distance just because it is different and it is like you're not walking to classes with people and stuff like that. So we find our own unique ways to get to know each other. I loved living on campus first semester, but one thing that I guess I didn't really look into until I see it being more prevalent now into second semester, but I bet it was still there first semester, was the accountability of COVID testing. So you could technically get tested off campus, and I've done that a couple of times, but that's a long story. I got a bill to my house and I was like, I don't have $375. Like they told me my insurance covered this, like off campus testing. And it ended up being fine. It was just my insurance paid my mom instead of like straightly to the company. So it was fine. But like there's a lot with like UMD Health Center where if you're not like been exposed or isn't your 2-week testing, like you need to provide insurance, which just shouldn't be the case because you've already went through the school's insurance, like all that stuff. It's extremely understaffed, the testing. The amount of times I've had to wait 3-4 hours to get tested is absolutely ridiculous. Like the test results don't always come back. I got a test result that was inconclusive. I've never heard of a test result being inconclusive. So those are my problems with the COVID testing that I've seen more second semester than I did first semester. It's definitely a concept that I think needs a lot of attention and reform, because I just tested positive for COVID 2 weeks ago. And when I did test positive, obviously I went and isolated. I did not go through the school because I didn't want to go to the quarantine housings due to the rat like that they have, like not feeding kids, the conditioning being completely awful, being negative, but been exposed and being put into housing with people that are positive, like all those things. So, but I do know due to those circumstances that some kids have chosen to stay in their dorms and use communal bathrooms and have their friends like come bring them food. And that's just not safe. That's not, especially you're in the bathrooms, like brushing your teeth next to someone and you're positive, and like, even though you're staying in your room doesn't mean you're not spreading it. So there's a lot that I've realized more second semester when it comes to COVID, but it definitely has a major impact on living on campus.
I feel that with the transition, to the online format, I think one big thing that has been kind of, the biggest issue for me is just the constant Zoom fatigue of like, always having to stare at your laptop screen, go to class, then go to extracurricular stuff afterwards on that, call, same as well. And it's just kind of prolonged my days in the sense of like, I definitely think that with this COVID environment, I think the workload has increased, as well as just a lack of motivation overall of, having this like kind of continuous cycle that's very similar. It's like every day seems the same. You open your laptop, you go to class, you close your laptop, you eat, then you open it again, go to class. Like, it's this whole cycle, and it just takes a toll on you as a person, like, what you're doing, just having to constantly, be on a roll and going to these classes and meetings. And yeah, it takes a lot of energy from I would say any student in my opinion, but like, yeah, especially for me specifically, it's a lot. I personally think the school could be doing quite a bit more, a lot more, definitely on all the fronts. A lot of the times it's like, these emails saying like, we hear you, we see you, the counseling center is open and stuff. And it's like, that's kind of what happens. And I mean, first of all, not a lot of students read those emails. I will say that's one thing. And I feel like that's kind of pretty much it we're seeing from, administrators. I feel like there could be a lot more outreach being done. And, it's like, obviously, no doubt hard in a, virtual environment. And, people are trying not to be on their screens as much and stuff, but there's definitely other ways to probably do better outreach, whether, going into classrooms, promoting it that way, engaging teachers in the dialogue of like, hey, your kids are stressed out. Like, like, I know they gave like kind of, I know they don't want to be controlling. I know they gave a guideline to teachers to say like, don't, go easy on them, but no one's really following that. And students are getting really stressed out. So I think on the terms of like, taking care of students, keeping them motivated, but also like preserving their mental health, like during these extremely stressful times, I think, providing these like reaching out, doing more outreach rather than just a simple email being sent out or an announcement on a website or something. Just like showing that like showing better that they care about it.
Currently all of our classes are not on campus, so we are all virtual. That's obviously really been difficult because medical school is very hard. And it's already a learning curve, and so kind of having to adjust to learning at that level and then adjust to learning virtually is really difficult. So while it has been difficult and we don't really have access to our professors that easily, and we don't really have access to the clinical aspects of things, that's been really difficult. And I think the hardest part is like medical school, no matter where you go to medical school, you still have to do the learning part, you have to do the lecture part of it, and that really is the part that we're doing right now. But the part that we're really missing out on because of the pandemic is the clinical part. In the first and second year, they kind of supplement your curriculum with some clinical experience to kind of make you kind of have a bigger picture of what's going on, and also just to give you a little bit of insight and to give you a little motivation, like, this is what you're doing all this hard work for, this is what you're learning for. And so that's kind of been taken away from us, so we've kind of had all of the really hard parts without any of the fun parts. that are supposed to like supplement your education and make you excited about learning and being a clinician. And so I think that's probably been the most difficult part, is just like not being able to go to school and to practice the physical exams that I'm learning, and practice listening to the heart sounds, or practice practice patient interviewing or anything like that. Like those are things that we haven't really gotten to do, and that's probably been like the most difficult part.
I think an important thing to note here is virtual learning is such a new thing, right? We haven't been able to do virtual learning through resources like Zoom and Canvas and all of those technologies for very long. And so there's just not great research on the efficacy of virtual learning. We're not even really sure how effective virtual learning is compared to in the classroom. So we don't know how virtual learning is impacting how well students are learning and absorbing and retaining material. We just don't have good research on that yet. What I will say anecdotally as an instructor is that it has been a monumental task for students to make the switch to the online environment. It is such a different experience to be behind a Zoom screen, oftentimes taking classes asynchronously, so not all at the same time or not with your peers. It requires a much higher level of self-regulation. So students need to plan out their learning to a much greater extent than they did in the past, because they're not required to go into class. They can watch the video whenever they want. The level of self-regulation that requires is really high, and it makes it much harder to succeed. At the same time, students are not getting to make the social connections that they did when we were learning in person. So they're not making social connections to the same degree with instructors and professors. They're not making social connections with peers and other students taking classes. And so they can't rely on those relationships to the same degree for support. When there's concepts or assignments that they're struggling with, it's harder to find somebody to help with those things. And so anecdotally, when I talk to my students, I have just been hearing how challenging this online learning environment is, both in terms of just planning and self-regulation, and also in terms of relationships and feeling isolated. There are all these domains where students are struggling because of the pandemic, and universities are working really hard, I think, to try to meet those needs. And at the same time, because of the nature of the pandemic and what a surprise it was to all of us, things have fallen through the cracks in a lot of ways. My hope is that as time goes on, universities think more about what kind of support students need across the board, but especially when a crisis situation arises like this, and are able to provide more help with things like mental health, things like getting healthcare needs and other basic needs met. In the pandemic specifically, I think helping students do the self-regulation that's required for an all online environment would be really helpful. So I think universities are really trying, and at the same time, more support is needed.
One of the results of the pandemic was an economic recession that ended years of declining rates of food insecurity. Feeding America projects that 42 million people, including 13 million children, may experience food insecurity in 2021.
I did struggle with an eating disorder. It wasn't anorexia or anything. It was just a general-based eating disorder before I came to school. And when I'm here, it was one of my parents' biggest concerns that I wouldn't be eating properly, or not even properly. It was that I wouldn't be eating enough. So one thing that I've learned here at the dining hall is that it isn't the most nutritious, most wanting food. Like, it doesn't taste like real people food, as I like to say. And first semester, there was no fruit, no yogurt, no veggies. There's veggies, but they were like drenched in salt and all that stuff, but nothing like nutritious. There was always like a meat, but it would be like soaked in like something like soy sauce, or like if it was like a fish, it was fried. It was always fried fish or something. Like the burgers weren't always there. Like there's always pasta, there's always mac and cheese, there's always grilled chicken, not grilled chicken, fried chicken, um, stuff like that. And it was just super hard for me at first. Now, second semester, there's more fruit, there's yogurt, there's a full salad bar, there's a vegan station that I go to a lot. They make more wraps and stuff like that. So first semester, it was not the best situation. It wasn't, I felt like I wasn't getting a nutritious diet. I felt like I was eating pasta for every meal, or eating like some type of something like that I shouldn't be eating. Quesadillas, tater tots, like all these things that I'm just like, I can't eat this for 3 meals a day every day. Another thing is that they stop breakfast it's open from 7 to 9, and they start lunch at 9:30. When I wake up at 9:15, I don't want to eat lunch for breakfast. So like that's another thing, is I tend to find myself not eating breakfast just due to the like availability and accessibility of what they give to you at the dining hall. I know personally I emailed them because it was very difficult for me. I was like, hi, I have like an issue, like I have an eating disorder. I need more food that I want to be putting into my body because I already struggle enough with taking a bite. So like might as well like help me here. And they asked me what foods I would be interested in eating. And I told them like fruit, salads, yogurt, all this stuff. I doubt I was the only one. I know that I like try to throw in there. I was like some like grilled chicken salads, or like a chicken Caesar wrap, like something healthy there. And I know it's been implemented once or twice. Like now they have ham and cheese sandwiches, just like pre-made already. Like if you don't want anything else, like it's on wheat bread, like you take that. I know I find myself going more to the gluten-free section, and that's one thing that they're very strict on now, is like if you don't have a food allergy, you can't eat that food, because a lot of people have realized like it's kind of healthier over there. I'm gonna go over there. So I think they're making changes based on student feedback and what they saw first semester.
Developing a healthy relationship with food really comes from consistency. So when people are able to have consistent access to healthy food, they're much more likely to have a healthy relationship with food in the future. But when people are food insecure and they don't have a consistent access to healthy food, or consistent access to food at all, that certainly is more likely to set them up for difficulties around food, whether that be binging or restraint or any other kinds of issues. The inconsistency associated with food insecurity can make it hard to have a healthy relationship with food, because so often students are not sharing about financial insecurity in their lives. It's something that I think universities could be doing a lot better job of trying to understand their students' financial and food needs and situation. I do know for a fact that many of my students, and many more than previous to the pandemic, are struggling with financial insecurity, which I'm sure extends to food insecurity as well. The pandemic has taken a huge toll on a lot of my students financially. And so I have to imagine many more of them are suffering from food insecurity.
One of the biggest challenges people are facing right now is mental health. The COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic recession have negatively affected many people's mental health and created new barriers for people already suffering from mental illness and substance use disorders. During the pandemic, about 4 in 10 adults in the U.S. have reported symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder.
I think social interaction is so important, because that's how you stimulate like happiness, endorphins. Like you need to be around other people, or you're going to be down on yourself. You might get into your head and you might just think of all these things. People worry. It's not just an anxiety thing, or it's not just a mental illness thing. It's people worry about things that they cannot control, and things that are not today, not this moment, not in the present. And I think having social interaction definitely distracts you from those worries. And it also like releases endorphins. Like I said, like being around positive energy, you can like feel it. And I always say giving off positive energy, you'll receive positive energy, and you need to be around people to have that.
In terms of feeling isolated, definite yes. Yeah, because again, it's a lot. It's like, it's like, yeah, you're always on the computer. Like, you don't want to, yeah, I guess like you're always on the computer. You're always talking to people, and it's a lot. Like, I mean, personally for me, social interaction is always a lot. Like, I would definitely classify myself as an introvert. So it's like having to go to classes and like have all of that and like doing breakout rooms and then going to meetings and stuff. Like, again, very much enjoy all of these things to like a great extent, but then also like very much it's just tiring. Like, that Zoom fatigue is very real. And like I said, being kind of, it's just you in the end of the day. Like, you close your laptop and it's just you in your room, and it's yeah, it's hard to like, again, you're not forming those connections with people. You're not like walking with them after class back to their dorm or diner or whatever. And you're just like, you close the laptop and like you're like alone in your room and you have more work to do.
Starting medical school is like a mental struggle in itself, and doing that in the pandemic, I think, was just so exacerbated. I really think, honestly, almost every single person in my class was just, especially in the first semester, was just so beaten down and so tired and felt so isolated, felt so lonely. Because it was just kind of like, no matter how much you did, no matter how much hard you tried, it was just like so hard to make friends. And it's like, how do you know, especially like in back in August, like that was really still kind of the height of the pandemic, and coming off of the summer, like it was like it was just anxiety, like very anxiety inducing to, or stress inducing to have to see people, because you're like really, you want to make friends and you want to be able to do things, but you don't want to be contributing to the spread of a pandemic. And so it was very isolating. And like I said, I think I spent more time alone in the past year than I have before. And when you're in an environment like medical school, really the only thing that you can do is study. And so really the benefit of being in a class with 200 other people is that you can study up together. And so that was really hard, because you didn't really have as many opportunities to find those friends to study with and make people, make study groups and see people all the time, and just chat with people walking down the hallways or during a break or whatever. You kind of just felt like, oh, well, I'm in my room, hunkered down, doing my own thing, and like when I'm done, I'm still alone. There was no like going home because you're already home. There was no going home to relax. It kind of just all blended together and felt like it's just kind of, I was kind of consumed by school and consumed by like isolation, and I just felt like I was in a little bubble, and it was just like so difficult to really break out of that and try to find a different way to make it work for myself. And so I think it was like the biggest test on my mental health ever. And it was kind of like I went into a vortex for, I feel like, for a really long time, where I was just so focused on doing well in school that I kind of just blocked out all the noise. But it kind of got to a point where I was just like so tired and so really, lonely, miserable even, that I just like couldn't do it anymore. And I was like, I have to find a way. I have to do things to make myself happy. I have to take breaks. I have to go out and explore and like find things to do that make me happy. Because I will literally not make it through this if I have to keep going in this way. And like we did lose a few members of our class that either deferred and are going to try to come back next year, or dropped out, just because of the stress and the anxiety and the detriment that they felt that COVID had on their education, and how hard it was to just kind of integrate into medical school during this time. And so I think it was hard, and I think a lot of people in my class experienced the same things. And I just remember, like, after our second exam first semester, we had a check-in meeting with like everyone in my class. And I think people were just so tired that it was just one person after another was unmuting and just saying like, I feel so tired. I'm so lonely. I'm so isolated. Like, I need help. Like, we need help. We need something to make this better, because we can't like keep going on like this. And so it was definitely hard and frustrating. But I think that since after that time, a lot of people in my class kind of banded together, and we were like, okay, we're gonna get through this together. Like, we're gonna make ways to be more accessible to each other, more friendly. So like one thing we started was like a group me, where it's like a Zoom study group me. So we like get on Zoom with each other and study, and people will just send a Zoom link and be like, I'm studying right now. If anyone wants some motivation, like get on with me. So like those are just little things that like we do to try to make it better, make it more accessible for each other. And so that's been, something that I really think carried us to where we are now, to a point where, we're able to thankfully get vaccinated as members of the medical community. And so that's really alleviated a lot of stress and anxiety. And it opened a lot of doors for us to start coming to school more and seeing each other more, and just kind of being able to move around more safely within the walls of our school, and creating more learning opportunities for us. So that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to that. But I think like it was a big lesson for all of us, and I don't think that we'll ever take like our education for granted again, and because it was just such a hard time. I think that, schools were just like, oh, well, we're going to focus on getting our curriculum online and then everything will be fine. Like nothing's going to change. But I don't think schools necessarily realize like how much of an impact it would have on people's mental health, and how like it's so hard to be successful whenever you're not in an environment where you're being motivated by your peers, or where you're able to just like one of the things I miss the most is just being able to like talk to my professors and see them walking around and like going up to them after class or whatever. Like that's so hard to do on Zoom, and that's really hard, like especially as like a first year medical student, when you don't really know any of your faculty members. That's been like particularly difficult, I feel like, because like I don't really feel like I really know any of my faculty because I haven't met them in person. And so that's kind of been, I think, they really have tried, but I think it's like now people are seeing the like social ramifications, and how like we really need to support a community, like still support the community virtually, and still, like really, really be intentional about bringing people together and using those resources. And so, I don't think it's necessarily that schools didn't try or schools didn't do enough. Like, I think more could have been done, but I think it was just kind of, it took time to realize like how much of an impact this was going to have on learning and like the student learning environment.
It's really tough. And I'm a therapist also. As a therapist, I am seeing so much depression and anxiety and just stress as a result of the pandemic. I think an important thing is to recognize that it's normal to feel those things right now, to come from a place of, to the best of your ability, trying to accept that this is how things are right now, and not feeling great every day is normal and okay. I also think there's things people can do to try to, kind of buffer themselves from the experience of the pandemic. They can be engaging in self-care, whatever that means to them, whether that's getting outside safely for a walk, exercising, calling a friend, Zooming with a family member, playing with a pet, doing some art, whatever is, your version of self-care, making sure that you're taking some time every day to do something that takes care of you as a whole person. I think that's so important. And also, as I mentioned, just really coming from a place of acceptance of the fact that this is a really challenging time for all of us. I think the jury is still out, but I would guess that everyone is going to be feeling the effects of this pandemic for a long time. This was such a big disruption of all of our day-to-day lives, no matter what your identities are. We all had a huge shift in our physical day-to-day lives, but also our sense of safety and security and certainty has really suffered over this year. We kind of thought we knew what the next year was going to look like, and then it radically changed. And that came with a lot of anxiety. And so my guess is we're all going to be feeling this in the years to come. And kind of as a society, as a community, we're going to be feeling this for years to come. And so my hope is, as we come out of this pandemic, we find ways to support our own mental health and also support each other as we kind of grapple with the after effects of this pandemic. I think people should be taking this at their own pace, in accordance with CDC guidelines. But they should be thinking about their own levels of comfort and kind of trying to figure out, how can I start to enter back into the social world as that becomes safe, without making myself feel anxious, without making myself feel too overwhelmed. So I certainly think people should be taking it at their own pace. And also, again, just to repeat, to really do some radical acceptance around the fact that it's going to continue to be challenging, uncertain, for the next while, and learning to sit with some of that uncertainty and anxiety is important, I think. So I would say that if your anxiety or depression or whatever you're experiencing emotionally, if it's causing you a great deal of distress, or if it's impairing your daily functioning, it's making it difficult for you to complete your school, complete your work, to function in your relationships, those are all really good signs that it's time to seek some mental health treatment. So if you're really distressed or you're having difficulty functioning, those are good reasons to seek mental health care.
Around 31.6% of people reported that their social relationships were affected to a high degree by the pandemic. Feelings of disconnect between peers and faculty are prevalent, and new relationships are practically non-existent.
Coming into the pandemic, my birthday was in April, it started in March. I was really anxious, and it was really hard for me to be able to leave my house. Like, it was a necessity, and I'm not going grocery shopping. Like, yes, my parents went grocery shopping, but I didn't leave my house for like 3 months when it first started, just because I was so anxious and worried about everything. And it was really hard in that sense to keep the relationships I already had while they know I was like super anxious about things. And like, it was my friends that were my real friends would of course check in on me and FaceTime me and all that stuff. But people in the beginning of everything didn't really understand the severity of it. So they would go and do like car circles and all that stuff. And I still wouldn't do that. And I guess it would like kind of like turn people off and away from me, like to be like, oh, she's weird. Like, she's so crazy about this. Like, we don't want to be friends with her. So that was really difficult at first, just because of like my own anxiety and the way I wanted to handle this pandemic. But when it came to my family, I've always been close with my family, but my dad works crazy hours and so does my mom. My sister's been at college the past 4 years, and just having this time where we were all home, and yeah, we still had to do work online and all that stuff, but it was just so nice to have like that connection with my family again, like where we all can like sit down and take a deep breath. And also, I feel like I had a better connection with myself. Like, I definitely learned more about myself through all this. Being from New York, it's definitely weird because all my friends that are from at school are from around here. So like their parents will come visit them a weekend, whatever. But I haven't seen my parents since I left right after Christmas. And I probably won't see them until May. I'm not going home for spring break due to the pandemic. I just don't want to cross state line. When it comes to my friends, my two best friends go to the University of Vermont and NC State. And it's very different because NC State, they don't care about COVID. In Vermont, they're like super strict about COVID. So it's really interesting to like talk to them and see that. We text almost every day, but we do try to like FaceTime at least like once a month. And my friends like that I've made here have been super great. I've met them just from like walking to the dining hall. But there are some friends that like I've made through Zoom classes, because I would see their square in 3 of my classes, and I would just reach out to them and be like, hey, like, I see we're in 3 classes together, like, want to work on this together, like, want to help each other with this, or just something like that. And we ended up getting really close, or we still talk to this day. And like, there's one girl that I made first semester in my math class that is now in my sorority, and I love her to death, and she's so cute. But it's definitely hard to talk and update with people like virtually when that's all we ever do. Like, I know personally, I don't want to hop on a FaceTime if I was just on Zoom for 3 hours, because I just feel like I'm done looking at a screen. But I don't know if that's just personally me. And like, especially, I have really bad eyesight. I wear contacts. So staring at a computer screen and then going even smaller to a phone sometimes just like makes my head hurt. So sometimes I just put my phone down and don't really talk to people, but it's definitely made it a little more difficult.
So when I was there, I didn't see my parents as much. So that was definitely a struggle. Especially like my parents are divorced, so they live in different areas or like, yeah, different places. So it's like, that's even more of a struggle to see, both of them. Cause like when I go home to my mom's, it's like, I don't see my dad. If I, see my dad, I don't see my mom. Like, it goes like that. And obviously COVID makes it worse. My parents are well, they're not gonna like me saying this, but they're pretty old. But, kind of obviously taking the precautions, like if I was coming home for a weekend, my roommates and I got tested once every week. So like we kind of maintained that, though we weren't really going anywhere in the first place. But again, it was hard to like really like, like I would see my parents every now and then, and you talk to them on the phone and stuff, but like I was insanely busy with school and stuff like that, and so I didn't really get to talk to them as much and stuff. And you feel like there's still like kind of this like disconnect between like, not as being as close as before, so which really sucks because my parents are my favorite people in the world. But yeah, and now that I've moved back home because of how things were just getting worse in College Park, and I honestly kind of still feel that like, I'm here at home. I'm at my mom's house and I get to see her every day, which is really great. But I know there's still a little bit of a disconnect in that I was like always in my room doing work because I had like, papers or assignments or whatever. Then I had my meetings too that I was going to. And it's like, I was kind of like operating the same way I was like back in College Park, of in not being able to maintain the relationship with my mom as well, or even my dad. Like when I'd go to his house, like still same thing. I'd be locked up in a room, not locked up, but like stuck in a room, doing my homework and stuff like. With friends, it's been like I have really great friends. I don't have too many like in terms of like outside of academics and organizations, those friends like who you'll, just your friends that you hang out with socially, academically, and, all that. I have like a couple of them, and I think we have been doing a good job to maintain our relationship during these times. We FaceTime almost every day, which is another screen to look at, but it's your friends, so it's like it doesn't really feel that terrible. In terms of making new relationships, it's pretty much non-existent, because yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people can say, I mean, some people I know are thriving in this environment, which is really great to hear. And then, but like in terms of like making relationships, it's definitely a lot harder because you can only connect with someone so much virtually. I know, yeah, in-person contact really just has like this whole other level to it that can make one, I feel more close to another, and feel like you have that kind of connection with them, with like that shared experiences that you have through meeting them in person constantly, versus online, which just, yeah, it's hard. I personally have not made a lot of friendships so far in terms of like new friendships online. I guess for Mary Perk, I think I definitely have, in terms of like I'm thinking about it now. It's weird to think that I haven't met some like individuals in person. Like I know I haven't met Ayana or Tatiana or Akshaya, like any of them in person, but they're all like border coordinators of Mary Perk, and like I see them so often, and I do consider them my friends. But yeah, but I guess in another front, like with people you would maybe meet in classes and like form those friendships, it's been a lot less because you just talk to them about academics, and then you're done, and you don't get to really explore the relationship beyond that.
I said it was obviously difficult to starting a new school during the pandemic, and it was particularly difficult just because in medical school, you're spending most of your time studying and you don't have that much free time. So it was just like really hard to make those connections with people, especially whenever we weren't on campus at all. Um, and like we try, it's easy to try, and like our school did try to do a few things here and there, and they tried to set up like little small group meetings or whatever, but it's just really hard. It was really hard at first, just because like studying day in and day out, and if you didn't really come to school with friends or you didn't come knowing people, like there really wasn't a way for you to meet people. And it's not like you could just go out anywhere and do anything in the middle of a pandemic. And so I think like that it really was difficult to find like a group of friends at first at the very beginning, in a pandemic, in a major city, with a lot of, rightfully so, with a lot of restrictions. But if like there's nothing to really foster that process or facilitate that process, it's really hard to just naturally make friends. Um, and so that, yeah, it definitely had an impact. And then, you know, furthermore, being in medical school also has an impact on your outside relationships. So it's really hard for people outside of medical school to understand what you're going through. And so it's like, it was kind of a double whammy where it was like, it was really hard to make friends here. And it's also like you're studying all the time. So you don't really have time to be going home or calling your parents or seeing your out of medical school friends, because it's like so hard to really, especially at first, to when you're trying to get your footing and trying to get your bearing, like to really, for people outside of medical school to understand what you're going through, especially in like the first semester. So yeah, it definitely took a toll at first, and it was like hard. I feel like I spent the most time alone, which I'm sure most people feel the same. Spent like in the past year, you spent the most time alone that I've ever had in my life, and so that was really difficult. But I think things are getting better, and things have adapted, and a lot of people are, shifting the way that we're trying to approach making friends and just kind of like going for it. And that's something that I had to do. I was like, I kind of just have to go for it. I have to just reach out to people, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But at least I tried. And so I think that kind of just letting those guards down and trying to be more intentional with making friendships um, was a challenge, because I'm just someone that just likes to naturally make friends. But I kind of had to change that, and that definitely was impacted, by the pandemic.
I mean, it's hard to think about a way that people's lives and psychology has not been impacted by the pandemic, but I think relationships are a domain that's been really significantly impacted by the pandemic. With social distancing in place, people just have not been able to see friends, coworkers, family members, etc., in person. And that takes a huge toll on our relationships. We know from a decent amount of research that for a lot of people, interacting through Zoom or interacting through texting or online or whatever is not as psychologically satisfying as being in the same room with the other person. And so while we've been able to keep in touch through technology, which is great, there's also been a real impact on a lot of people's relationships. Again, just being through a Zoom screen or being through a phone screen is not the same. As humans, we are wired for social connection. It is part of our deepest psychology to crave and seek out social connection. And on the flip side to that, social isolation is hugely detrimental to our well-being. We know that from decades and decades of research. Social isolation is not good for our mental health and well-being. And so in the pandemic, when lots of people are feeling isolated, feeling alone, that's likely to have a strong impact on their mental health and well-being. It's hard to overstate the extent to which we are all evolutionarily wired for connection, and not getting that connection, particularly not getting that connection through in-person interaction, is very detrimental to our mental health.
They constantly say they're here to support us, but it's extremely hard, especially when, for example, I was having a really hard time in my business statistics class. I was really down on myself mentally because I wasn't doing as well. I felt like I didn't have a connection with the professor. So I made an appointment with my advisor, like anyone else would do. My advisor didn't even call me. And I was just like, I had an appointment. I woke up for this appointment. I was ready for this appointment, and you couldn't even call me. Like, it's just like, how much support is there if we really can't even like have access to what we need? And especially with mental health and all that, we have the crisis hotline, but that's for crisis. I'm not in crisis, but I'm still struggling. And I think there needs to be a support system where people can go to and just be like, hey, I'm feeling this type of way. And other people be like, oh, I'm feeling this type of way too. Stuff like that. So like, I don't think it needs to be a crisis hotline, but just like a group that like people like me and you could go into and be like, yeah, we didn't leave our house for X amount of days. Like, I was anxious about this and I still am. This is what angers me about it. How do I control that like issue that I'm having? I definitely think that being vaccinated to be required to get into a classroom, a dorm hall, a plane, to travel, anything is very, very crucial and the next part of our phase. But if I'm not able to get a vaccine, should that defer me from being able to go in a classroom? I think that's going to be the biggest argument. I personally don't agree with it. I think if you're not vaccinated, you shouldn't be in a classroom. But I think there's going to be other people like me that don't see the way that I do that are going to have that argument. So I think, in my opinion, being vaccinated to go to class is very crucial in this next step, but there is going to be some counter arguments to that.
I'm kind of, in terms of the vaccine rollout, personally kind of hopeful that, I know UMD is preparing to go back into in-person instruction because there is an assumption of like getting herd immunity by August for the nation's population. So, I mean, it's like, I know vaccine distribution hasn't been going too great. So it's like August really seems like a long shot. But I guess a little hopeful. I don't know. But, ideally would love to have that herd immunity by then. And, everything could sort of return to normal. But obviously kind of looking at things more realistically. It doesn't seem possible. And my guess is in the fall, either they're going to probably do the hybrid style again. We can see for the spring. I don't know how to predict for the spring, but my guess is fall is going to be pretty similar. And, but if it's not, still like if I had in-person classes, like, being next to someone who isn't vaccinated, whether I guess I think we still need to all, like, before that herd immunity is achieved, need to obviously, the important thing people seem to forget after they're vaccinated is you need to still abide by COVID-19 guidelines, like, especially when you're around unvaccinated people. Like, it's different if you're like all vaccinated and around each other. But, if you're going out into the public or something, just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean you can stroll in with no mask on or something. No, you still have to abide by COVID-19 guidelines. And I would, I genuinely can't imagine how fall will be like. And I would imagine if obviously that herd immunity is not achieved, that they shouldn't even be having in-person classes in the first place until this like thing is just like figured out. Or if they have hybrid ones, it's just obviously some very small group of people. I would just want to know that the administration is taking all the, steps to, ensure the campus community's health and safety even better next semester as we reach kind of like the home stretch. Just know that, like, yeah, if that person is not vaccinated, I guess it depends if it's like, if there's herd immunity, that's one thing. If they're choosing not to get vaccinated, that's another thing. If they just haven't gotten the chance to because they're not eligible yet, that's another thing. So I guess it just depends on the scenario, how I will react to that.
Just starting off, I'm not an expert, and I'm just a medical student, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm like an authority on this or whatever. But yeah, so the vaccine, it's an mRNA vaccine, so it is a new technology, but it's just a different way um, that can be utilized to really kind of trick almost our immune system into making antibodies for the virus. That way, if you do come into contact with the virus, you already have the mechanism inside of your body to defend yourself, and to help you fight off the infection. And so it's just really important, for all of us to do our part to get vaccinated, because that can really help stop the spread of the pandemic. Not only protect yourself but also protecting others. The trials showed that the vaccine not only was able to stop severe complications related to the disease, but it was also helpful in stopping the spread of COVID. And we've seen things trending in a better direction since since the vaccinations have started. And so I think that we hope that that is attributable to the vaccine, and we hope that we will continue on that path. And so I think that it's really just from a public health standpoint, from a medical standpoint, it's just really important for all of us to do our part and get vaccinated, because we all want the same thing, which is to get to the end of the pandemic. And so I know it can be scary because it is a new technology, and you never you never know what could happen. But I think that A lot of people have gotten it, and that they've done the trials and they've tested, do their own research and really read about it and consider, getting it, because it is just a really important tool, and one of the best tools that we have to be able to fight off the pandemic.
Certainly think doing some positive thinking about the future can be really helpful. So thinking about, okay, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, what is my life going to look like? What is something I'm looking forward to once most of the country is vaccinated? What are some of the things I'm going to do once it's safe? Engaging in some of that positive thinking about the future, kind of optimistic thinking about the future, I think that can be really helpful and kind of an antidote to the day-to-day grind of living through a pandemic. However, if you find yourself tipping over into anxiety about the future, then maybe thinking about the future a lot is not as helpful for you. But I think for most people, engaging in purposely, intentionally positive thinking about the future can be a helpful strategy. I think one message that I hope all of us take individually and institutionally is the importance of collective action. Something like the pandemic really laid bare how much we depend on each other. Because the way that COVID is transmitted, we have to rely on our neighbors, other people in our community to keep us safe, to be doing safe and healthy behaviors. So that collective action is really important. And as we come out of the pandemic, it's going to be even more important that we support each other, that we're all engaging in safe and healthy behaviors with the goal of keeping the whole country, our entire community safe. So it's that collective action piece that I hope that we learn and move forward. And in future crises, future situations, I hope we're able to draw on that and to engage in collective action to help each other and keep each other safe.